Alright, let's go to Taco Tico. So this is Taco Tico, and you probably don't even know what this is unless you grew up in a town with one, but if you grew up eating this stuff, like, there is nothing better. It's not even real Mexican food, it's kind of a, I don't know, like a very Americanized version of it. If you look on the internet and you do a Google search for Taco Tico Meat Recipe, what's going to come up is actually made by me. I have a food blog called Damn Good Food, and I originally posted a recipe on there, and I'm going to make a video of it and revisit a couple things. There was a couple mistakes in my recipe that I'll explain a little later. So I'm just going to show you what I'm going to eat today. This is a Sancho, and a Sancho is basically just a soft-shelled taco with lettuce and tomato and meat and cheese, and it's really tasty. Just as an idea of how crazy people are about this place, the drive-through line goes completely around the building and like down the block that way. It's got this crazy cult following, and I guess you would have to call me a member of that. This is a Tico burger or taco burger that I bought extra to be able to take apart and kind of show you some of the meat here. It basically is just taco meat on a bun with tomato and lettuce, so I'm going to get the meat out of there and I'll show you that. So this is just the bare meat. If you open it up a little bit, and I'm going to do that, one thing that you'll notice right away is there's very little, if any, actual spice in here, and that's it's not Mexican food. It's like processed whatever take on it. Now there are little bits of black pepper. There's an overall kind of onion taste to it, but there's no onion in there, so I'm assuming they used like onion powder or something like that. And there are little bits that you would think are onion, but they're not. Like this little one right there. There are all sorts of these little bits of extra stuff in there that kind of looks like onion. There's a little bit of oat. A little bit of oat there. You can tell it's oat because you see the seam in the that usually runs down the center of an oat. Here's another one. That's not oat. But so you've got meat in here, but there's something in addition to the meat, and there really isn't any actual onion in there. So it's something that looks like meat a little bit, and is compatible with meat, but it's not meat. It took me quite a while to figure out what that is because it's not meat. And there is some oat in here that I've been able to find, and that I found on my last the last time I took one of these apart. But it's not all oat. Some of that is something different, and it took me a while to figure out what that was. And I talked to a friend that used to work at a Taco Tico, and also to my aunt, and she was a home ec major. What that is textured vegetable protein, or TVP. And it's basically like soy, only instead of being like soybeans like you're thinking of, they make it into a thing that is compatible with meat. So that does a couple things for them. It stretches the meat because their main expense is going to be ground beef, but then the other thing it does is it makes it more spreadable, and it gives it like a little bit silkier texture. Here's a couple more little pieces of it. So that's one thing. The other thing is the meat. They leave pretty much all the grease in there, from what I can tell. And the other thing you'll notice is the texture is extremely fine. This is not your typical ground beef that you'd make into spaghetti or something like that. They've done something extra to this to get it finer like that. And you can see some of the spices there. is a little piece of what looks to be chili powder. And you can see black pepper through here. You can taste onion, although there aren't any actual onion flakes in here. And there is a pretty significant amount of this textured vegetable protein in here. Another kind of flavor characteristic of this is that there's just a little bit of a tang to it. And the last time I did this, I kind of figured out that that was vinegar. Although different companies will use different food additives to kind of give you that, and I think Taco Bell uses like a yeast or something like that. But I don't have access to the same stuff that they do. So my goal at home is to make something like this that you can make at home with stuff that's already in your house. The only thing you have to get that's even remotely hard to find is that textured vegetable protein, but I'm going to show you a company that makes that. So now the real obvious question is, why go to the trouble of doing this if you live next to a Taco Tico or live close by? And I didn't go about this when I lived by a Taco Tico. I grew up kind of close to one, and then I spent a long time away from there training, and like I hear this over and over again. The first thing people do when they come back to their hometown is they go to Taco Tico. And I just wanted to be able to have something similar to that without having to drive 10 to 12 hours back home. And so I kind of figured out a way of doing this. Again, if you do a Google search, you'll find my recipe up there. It's the one that calls for 1/3 a cup of oatmeal. And there is oats in here, or at least I think it's oats, but I think it's a very small amount in comparison to how much textured vegetable protein is in there. So I'm going to get started, and we'll see if we can't come up with something that tastes very similar to this in short order. So to start with, I've got some ground beef. I'm not using the real expensive, like super lean stuff, because they wouldn't use that. And if you look at the meat, it's pretty darn greasy. Now I've got the meat, and I'm going to add a cup of water. I might have to add more. And this is the step that you have to do if you're trying to get that nice, teeny tiny little, those teeny tiny little pellets of meat in there. You just take, and basically what you're trying to do is mash this up and make like a slurry of meat particles and not leave any chunks. And it's kind of gross to do it, but if you want that texture, this is kind of what you're going to have to do. Now, if I had to guess, I'd say that they are using some sort of a meat slurry product, like pink slime or something like that. And that's one of the reasons why they get that nice smooth texture. Or they're having it processed in such a way that it comes really fine and crumbly like that. Now this is the textured vegetable protein that I was talking about, and you can see, it's billed as like a meat substitute or whatever, but and some people will actually make tacos and such out of this, like vegetarian type food. And I don't really have any other use for this other than trying to copy Taco Tico. And for that 1 pound of hamburger I used, I'm going to use 1/3 a cup of this stuff. So in goes our glorious textured vegetable protein into our pink, disgusting slurry of meat. And if you came upon this recipe, looking for a recipe for taco meat or something like that, and you haven't eaten Taco Tico, just go away, because you won't like this unless you like Taco Tico. Just be forewarned, this is not Mexican food by any stretch. And if you don't like Taco Tico, you are not going to like this meat recipe. Now the next thing I'm going to add is 1/4 cup of these Quaker Oats, and I'm not even positive that needs to be in there. My original recipe called for 1/3 cup of it, but that's because I didn't know about the textured vegetable protein. And from my research into, fast food and why they use oatmeal in their taco meat and stuff, it's because it helps maintain moisture and provides a nice kind of silky texture. And so I'm going to use a 1/4 cup of that, and I'm just going to pulse it real briefly in a coffee grinder in order to make those particles real small and disguise them a bit so that people don't know I'm ripping them off. Yeah, so you want them, kind of softened up a bit. And in goes our oats, nicely ground. Now I ended up adding more than a cup of water to this to get that, disgusting slurry look. Now the next thing I'm going to add, because taco tico meat is delicious, but it is just fatty and disgusting and horrible. So I added about 2 tablespoons of butter. Next I'm going to add some garden variety chili powder, and in my original recipe I called for a teaspoon. I'm knocking that back to a 1/2 teaspoon, just because on further examination of that meat there just is not a lot of spice in there. In this big huge thing I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of just regular old black pepper. Next thing I'm going to add is a teaspoon of onion powder. The meat does have an onion flavor to it, but there are no chunks of onion in it, so I use onion powder. In the original recipe I called for onion salt, and I've since started using onion powder and then adjusting the salt myself to taste. I also, in the original recipe, called for garlic salt, but Taco Tico was started in 1962 in Kansas, and I'm just doubting very highly that they put garlic in anything. So I'm leaving that garlic salt out as well. Also, in my original post on that, I called for cumin to be added separately. I've since not done that. I was going through a real phase where I loved cumin, and I'm doubting that they add cumin separate from their chili powder, because chili powder already has cumin in it, as well as oregano and other things depending on the manufacturer. Now this is just plain old vinegar, and I'm going to add a teaspoon to that, and we may or may not add more later depending on how tangy this comes out. The other thing that I called for in the original recipe was MSG, and add that if you want. I'm not going to add that. Everybody says, well, I don't like Chinese food because of the MSG, it makes me sick. Well, no, probably not. Probably what it was they had something sitting out for like 8 hours, and you got the poops because, the food was sitting out 8 hours, not because there was MSG in it. But I have not been adding MSG to this, and I don't really notice the difference. So that's basically it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up, I'm going to put it on kind of low heat here, and we're going to brown this and let it cook. And every once in a while I'm just going to come by and make sure to keep stirring like this to keep those little meat pellet nuggets to the small consistency that we all know and love. One last thing, the meat is actually fairly salty, and so I just added a teaspoon of salt, and at the end of cooking I'm going to check and make sure that it has the right sourness from the vinegar and the right saltiness as well. Now we've got the hamburger browned. There's a significant amount of water that needs to be kind of simmered off, and we're going to go ahead and do that. Notice it's got the nice smooth texture, and we're going to adjust the taste after it cooks a little bit to make sure that it has the right flavor. So the meat now, all the water is evaporated, and it's basically just meat and fat and tasty textured vegetable protein and other disgusting things, and I'm just going to leave it off the heat and let it sit. I did one other thing. I tasted the meat and compared it to my little sample of the Taco Tico meat, and the Taco Tico meat was a little bit saltier, so I added just a little bit more salt. and the Taco Tico meat had just a touch of sweetness to it. So I added just like a quarter to a half a teaspoon of sugar, and I can't tell the difference. Side by side blind taste test, to me that recipe is the same as the Taco Tico meat. I've let this cool a little bit, and something else to notice is look at how that like smears and spreads. That's a real characteristic of the Taco Tico meat. They just kind of smear it on a tortilla and roll it up, and then you get this great disgusting flavor and texture that just everybody loves. Now that's the stuff that I made, and here's the meat. This is cool, that's hot, but this is the meat right straight from Taco Tico, so it's the same damn thing.
We've got
How's your tacos?
Yummy!
I don't think anyone wants cupcakes for dessert.